I could feel myself coming back, my body coming back alive, as if I was breathing, like you get the wind knocked out of you. And that's how it was. So I noticed this pain and I was in a lot of pain. And then my eyes began to open very slowly. And that's when I had the experience of seeing fairies. So it was like my eyes were opening, but it was almost like maybe my third eye was open as well. When I had these vision of these little beings with wings flying all around me, going up to the trees. I was surrounded at this point.
My guest today is Tyler Deal, who had a mountain biking accident. And while he was out of his body, he encountered fairies. And I've never talked to anybody who had this type of an encounter in a near death experience. So I am super excited to learn a little bit more. And he's also become a healer after his near death experience. So we're going to dive into that as well. So, Tyler, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Lori. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Good. Why don't we start with a little bit about what your life was like before you had this accident?
Okay. Very young, 3 or 4 years old. I lived on an orchard in Los Altos area in California, and I was very connected to nature then. I could basically talk to the nature spirits then, and I had a very happy childhood up until about the age of 4 or 5 years old. And when our family made the transition to another state, my dad moved his company to another state. I moved into another state, I guess you could say, because I became very depressed, and also just the household environment became very volatile and almost dangerous. Well, was dangerous, I should say, not almost. And so went into protection mode, and I was losing what it was to be what a child should be that innocence and that playfulness. And so when I moved into my teenage years, I got into a lot of drugs and alcohol through my high school years. I became more depressed. I began to take on the belief system that there's something wrong with me based on my conditioning and based on my environment. And what slowly became a very present part of my life was spirituality. My parents had separated. I think when I was about 13, 14 years old, I went and lived with my mother, and she became very spiritually open at that time. She always had been, but she became very psychic and open and connected. And so I looked at that as something that I wanted. And I became not only, I never really talked to her about it, but she always had books I looked at. And so then I moved back into nature. So I would go skiing in the mountains or running through the woods or whatever that was. So that became my connection. Simultaneously, I still had this part of me that was depressed, and went and partied and went out to Seattle with my friends to see all these bands. And but I feel like that part of God was coming in more to help. So fast forward to when I went to college, and I went to college out of state. So I went back to California at Humboldt State University, and Humboldt is known for its beautiful redwood forest and beautiful ocean coasts. So that's why I didn't really care about what my major was or what school I just wanted to be in beauty and get away from home,
You're
kind of
majoring in nature.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. So what I had noticed for myself is once I got there, I became very, very depressed, and I didn't know why I was still that way when I was around all this beauty. I mean, it took me a while to actually discover why, but so it became heavier and heavier, and I to the point where I didn't want to be on the planet. And my only salvation, you could say, was talking to God and also going into the forest and going to the beach. But it was mostly the forest, I think, because those beautiful trees were just, there's just so much presence and so much majesty and love that I felt from them. That's why I had to go back there consistently. So that's what I did. And So the depression at the same point, it was like this balance, right? But it was still heavier than it still superseded this connection that I had. So my inner dialogue and my dialogue with God, with source was, I don't want to be here. This is too hard. I don't want to be here. I could feel it. It was within my demeanor, my whole body and my whole being. It's just that I didn't want to be here. It was just, and not that necessarily any external circumstances were causing that, but it was very much a mind thing. And then also I could feel it in my body because I had this perception that I wasn't good enough. So from that point, it was after my second year of college. I was down in the dumps, you could say, and I threw up my arms basically and said, just take me. I don't want to be here on this planet anymore. And it was then 4 days later that I had my experience in the forest where I almost lost my life, or I guess you could say I did come back.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
Okay. So it was a morning time. I was riding my bike on the trails in the forest, Arcata Community Forest, which is right behind Humboldt State, the college I was going to at the time. And I knew everywhere I was going. I didn't, I never wore a helmet because I just liked the breeze. But I did do sometimes, like I would take jumps that were a little bit big and just to, but I knew them. And so on my way home, I think I was probably in there, maybe I was in there an hour or two. I don't really remember. On my way home, I took a trail that I was very familiar with that did have multiple jumps on the way down a hill. And it was the very last jump that I had noticed that was incredibly built up. It was somebody previous, I knew the jump, but somebody I'd noticed had actually created it even bigger. So I wasn't used to that. And so it was too late by the time I hit it. And I went flying in the air. And I just knew it was just like, it was so quick. It was like, I knew that I was going to crash and I couldn't do anything. So that's when I came down on my front tire and then my head and my back and my neck. And I was like, there was no consciousness there anymore. The next thing I remember, my spirit was floating above the trees. It was not really my body. It was more so just like a space. That's the best way I could describe it. I could say like a light or a space, which was me. And I was instantly placed in this almost like a just complete peace and quiet. And I just began to notice my surroundings, and I could feel like my senses were turned on, almost like we have all these physical senses, but they were very much heightened. And so it's like I could feel everything, see everything, experiencing everything right then and there, like the breeze moving through me, being really close and hearing the ocean, even though it was 5 miles away, animals, dogs barking, and almost like they were right there. I was part of them, or they were barking in my ears, being able to see very detailed parts of the redwood tree where the little, like the water has crystals. So it was like looking at the water crystals on the dew. So this was happening. There wasn't any sequence of it. It was basically, it was like I could tune in and micro tune into something, but I could also felt very expanded at the same time. And so I was in that space, I don't know for how long. And I remember looking down at some point at my body and recognizing that body wasn't me, that it was that part, that almost like I see it now like a personality, like a character, the person that was going to college, that was depressed, that had this all this history and everything. So it was like looking at this character. That's why I say it wasn't me. And then I heard that there was like an inner cognition, a direct cognition, like a voice, I guess you could say, but it was more like a knowing. But it was like it came in and said, are you ready to go further, or do you want to go back? And I said, I don't want to die. And as soon as I said that, I was, you could say it slammed back in my body. That's dramatic, but it was more so like I was back in my body and on the ground, and I could start to feel the pain. my physical body pain. It was really, and I could feel myself coming back, my body coming back alive, as if I was breathing, like you get the wind knocked out of you. And that's how it was. It was like, and that was, so I noticed this pain and I was in a lot of pain. And then my eyes began to close or open very slowly. And that's when I had the experience of seeing fairies. So it was like my eyes were opening, but it was almost like maybe my third eye was open as well. I don't know, but it was my eyes were open when I had these vision of these little beings with wings flying all around me, going up to the trees. I was surrounded at this point. I was looking up. I was kind of on my back in an angle looking up, and I could see and feel the trees, and then the fairies were flying all around, coming down. And I did hear little giggles, and they did have wings, and they did have different, I guess, skin color. It was almost like translucent though, so it wouldn't be like human skin. It was almost like light. Uh, um, some were what we could say naked, but didn't really quite look like that. And some had garments on, basically like these translucent garments. Male and female is what I noticed, and I was, yeah. So I felt and I knew that it was almost like my decision at that moment to come back. I knew that I needed to be back, but I didn't at the same time. So I wasn't really thinking about this process. It was more so being in awe of this experience. And then I remember simultaneously, maybe it was happening at the same time, I don't know, that there was like this ringing, like a deep ringing of a Tibetan singing bowl. And I knew that was the trees, uh, like bringing a frequency to me and helping me and heal, I guess you could say, heal me. So, yeah, and then I was brought back to my body pain, Lori, and it was like that kind of started to shut off that experience. And once I was brought back into that body pain, I shut myself off again. So the next
Wow.
experience, yeah, the next experience was I was waking up in the ER at the local community little hospital there in town.
This is incredible. I've never heard an NDE story quite like yours.
Mhm.
So, I guess the first question I have for you is you heard what you said was a voice and also knowing. You've had a little bit of time to process this. Have you
Mhm.
figured out what that voice was?
I guess not totally, really. I mean, I could make assumptions, but it felt like it was like me. It felt like it was
Higher
me.
self, right? Higher self.
Yeah, yeah, like my soul, whatever that term people use. It felt like it was me. So I don't, it's language is hard because I could separate and say that God said that, but like God I know is within me too. There's a familiarity with that knowing, if that makes sense. Like when you hear something or you know something, there's a truth behind it. And that's what that voice felt like. That's what that knowing feels like. Yeah.
Wow. You also talked about that ringing noise at the very end with and you recognize that as being the trees. So do you think that was the collective sound of all the trees in the forest that you were surrounded by that they were making? Do you feel like they were actually communicating with you, or is that just the noise that if our senses were turned on, we would all hear something like that?
Wow, that's a really great question. I don't know. I felt like that's very possible. I can make assumptions, but I never really asked them what that is. I did read later on a book called Anastasia of Siberia, and she's this woman that lives in the forest, and she talks about how the cedar trees actually, cedars, which are part of the redwood family, they actually create these ringing tones, these healing tones. So it's very possible that they're always doing that. And maybe I just became aware at that moment that that tone was helping me. That could have been that, or it could have been directed at me. I don't know. I felt like it was coming, like it was helping me in some way. But what exactly that is, it, I don't know. It could be their community communicating with each other.
They're sentient beings, so it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm getting ready on Arbor Day this year in April of 2024 to post a video from a man who had a near-death experience, who was actually tasked to come back and clone the ancient trees of the world. And so I'm
Oh,
working with his Archangel Ancient Archive. I'll link the video up here after it gets released, but he talks about trees being sentient beings, being antennas that actually send energy out into, they release energy from our planet, and then they also bring in energy from the cosmos into our planet. And he said that if you back up to the tree and you put your palms against the tree behind you, can connect to and communicate with these trees. And last week he sent me an
wow.
article where a man has created some type of a device using AI technology, and he's taking little connectors and connecting it to the different branches, the different leaves on the trees, and it's running through this device and making a noise. So I completely believe everything that you're talking about. Trees are sentient beings. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And everything's a frequency. So I'm really curious.
Mm,
I would imagine that frequency probably stuck with you because your senses were so awakened. Have you
mm.
ever encountered that frequency in our music and our system that matched, and it was a recognition of that tone?
Wow, that's really those again, these are really good questions because I haven't honestly done a lot of research on it or really explored that part. My focus has been so much on discovering myself and my gifts, and I haven't really looked at it that way. I am guessing that it's not anything that I've really heard before in music, other than the tone being as similar to a really deep humming of a Tibetan bowl.
Okay.
Um, so if I were to look, I know there's different frequencies like 432 and
Yeah.
528, and I'm aware of that, but I haven't really heard or connected the dots to that. Like I would need to, I think, go back and to the forest, particularly the redwoods, and see if I could tune in and just notice. But now I'm curious. I'm curious if there is a connection. And I
I
wouldn't,
wonder if I bet you would recognize it if you heard it.
yeah,
It'd probably
maybe. Yeah.
resonate deep within you, I would think. Redwoods are
Yeah.
so beautiful. I've spent a
Yeah.
lot of time personally in Muir Woods in the
Mm,
San Francisco area, and there is something so special about those redwood trees. I'm not surprised that you're connected to them, but I am really surprised to hear about the fairies. Okay, so we've all probably experienced what a picture of a fairy looks like from different childhood books and fairy tale type of books. Now, these
mm,
seemed more from what you're describing as beings, so not like a cartoonish looking animated, which is all we have ever seen of fairies, but something was a human-esque looking with translucent type skin, male and female. Did they
mm.
have a look to them where like their faces would be a human looking face, or did they look a little distorted or different?
So, like, my vision was blurred at that time. So it wasn't like I could see real detail. It did look more human than anything, but it's not like I could see, oh, they have a nose and they were different. And I noticed that, but it was more so me noticing them almost like a whole fairy as opposed to there was detail, but it wasn't like it felt more human. It felt like a little human, basically, with wings is the
And how,
best
what
way.
size? What size are we talking about? Are they like,
Yeah. Yeah, like I felt like they could change sizes, but that could have been just my perception at the time because I could see them go up and then come down, and they seemed like they were maybe about that size. So maybe about 4 inches, 5 inches, something like that. But at the same time, they moved so fast. They could stay somewhere and then they would move. They could move any direction. So as far as size, I don't know. And some people, like I know I've done videos before and people say, "Oh, those are pixies or those are the fae." And I haven't done research on that either because it's almost like my own experience is more important than what other people call them or what they say they look like. It felt like a frequency, basically. They are like they have an environment. They choose the redwoods or they choose evergreen trees. So maybe they're, and I'm just throwing out thoughts now, like maybe they are part of that environment. They do feel like they're like protectors of the trees, of that ecosystem. That is their home. I know I'm getting off subject here, but yeah, they feel like little humans, but their energy is very light, like very joyful, very giggly. That's what stuck with me, I think, the most, more than how they looked. It was more so their joy that they
And I don't think
bring.
we're off subject at all. I think people would be really curious about the details of this. That was the first thing that struck me when I heard your story. Like, how often do I get a chance to talk to somebody who had an experience like this? They're flying around you and you can see them. Do you think that they had an awareness that you could see them?
I think so, yeah, because it felt like there was a communication happening. My eyes were open. That it didn't feel like they were just doing their thing. It felt like they knew I was there and they knew that I was coming too, and it felt like they were bringing joy and lightness to a situation where I couldn't do much.
Oh,
So yeah,
wow.
so I think that stuck with me too. It wasn't like me just noticing them go about their life. It was like they were there for that reason. There was a purpose there behind it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. So, with this experience, have you ever had any type of an encounter where you've had glimpses of them at all since you had your NDE?
Oh yeah, not all the time, but yeah,
Okay.
there's definitely times.
So, you said you had encountered nature spirits, and I was going to ask you. So, it's a
Yeah.
great segue into that question. What are nature spirits that you encountered when you were 3 and 4 years old? Does it connect to those fairies? And maybe does it have something to do with why they
Mhm.
manifested during your experience?
I think it definitely does. That's the childhood part of me. That's the playful little boy, happy, connected to the planet, connected to himself. And looking at that time when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, I don't remember little details, but I do remember general stuff like seeing faces in the oak trees, seeing like little sparkles, like the fairies flying around me. I do remember being able to go up to a persimmon tree and talk to it, and it would talk back, stuff like that. So, not like childhood memories, but not like the real details of them. I think that hopefully I'll get those back. And then about a year before my NDE, I had an experience. I was laying on my bed. I felt that my heart was very open and my eyes were closed. And I could see those basically the same fairies in my inner vision flying around. I couldn't hear anything at that time, but I could see them flying around. And then after my NDE, I've had an experience on the property here where we have, what are those, not butterflies but dragonflies all over the place. We have butterflies too. And so what had seen, and I haven't talked about this before because some of these things are very close to me, they're just my own experience. I saw a
Yeah.
dragonfly fly by me and then turn into basically a fairy, but it was big. I don't know how big, like pretty big, and then just sweep up and disappear. So I had that experience. And then I had, back in this past December, I had a friend here and we walked at Volcanoes National Park and we could see them like almost like a blue light. And my friend had taken pictures and they were like, you could see that there was almost like the shape of them. And yeah, and you could feel them too. You could feel the presence of them in that little forest area with the ohia trees. So yeah, so there has been definitely a few experiences.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us because I
Yeah,
think that these experiences are so unique to people, and there's so much more we don't know than we do know. And we're starting to learn more about frequencies and healing and dimensions and multiple dimensions, and it's being proven through things like quantum physics and all this. There's
right.
science that's starting to back all these things up. So
Oh
I
yeah.
completely agree that especially when you go through a change where you change your frequency that you are here on earth by having a near death experience. I've talked to a lot of people now, and almost without exception, they have some type of gift, I'm going to call it, that they come back with something that they didn't have before. And so it makes sense to me that you opened yourself on some way, not just to be able to see with the third eye, but also because your frequency had an adjustment as well. So can you
Mm.
share with us some of your gifts that you've come to understand since you had your near death experience?
Sure. So what I didn't know before, which and I don't really like to use the term empath so much because I think people can use that as a almost not everybody, but they could use it as an excuse to not take responsibility for how they're feeling, saying
Mhm.
that they're feeling a certain way or they're picking up on other people's energy. And I don't think we're all one. So I think that's like taking responsibility for your own emotions. But I became what I call almost like hyper or super empathic, where I could feel everything. So without trying to get into the language of separation too much, it would be being able to walk into a room and sense somebody's depression and then being able to see why they have that, or and not just people but also animals, like if they're down and they need love, like I can feel that. And so just that, I think, and I've learned that a lot of that comes from also my childhood that I shut down, is that I had to become very protective. I was in fight or flight. So I had to be very in tune to my environment at all times to make sure that nobody got hurt, that I didn't get hurt. And so after my NDE, there was a process of healing. Um, it wasn't like all butterflies and dragonflies. There was a process of looking at more of that depression and those open wounds, and there still is. I still know that I have the certain wounds that I need to look at and process in order to be happy. I generally live a happy life, but there's always something that comes up, right? And so that was part of it. And I did get training with like different healing modalities. Like I learned how to remote heal, those kinds of things. I was a body worker for years. I really got into Hawaiian healing practices from Hawaiians, not from people that would come in and just create their own version of the Hawaiian culture. So I was more so into the Hawaiian healing methods. And as I had that foundational training, and because I had help going through right after my NDD, I had help from healers and people that helped me with my body and with emotional, mental. So then that became basically very important for me to be able to help others. And
That's wonderful.
yeah,
So, low healing, isn't that the gratitude mantra?
that's Ho'oponopono. So
So, what are they
look,
different? How are they different? I guess I'm not familiar with the second one.
so lomi means to rub. So that's why you hear the term lomi lomi salmon. So they're putting a rub on the salmon. So lomi
Mhm.
lomi is a massage. You're basically massaging the muscle. And I learned from a lady called Auntie Margaret Machado over in Kailua Kona. She's no longer here. She was a kapuna, and she taught us basically that we love the body that's before us, but it's not we loving it. It's we allow God to do the healing through us, because I believe that God or source or whatever that name is the only one that can actually do that healing. Otherwise, it just becomes thinking that we can do it. That's not really happening. And so is there's a newer practice to it, but there's also a very ancient practice to it where it's not just the body. It's nutrition, it's health, it's your thoughts, it's seeing that all of life is your family. The wind, the breeze, the kapuna, having taking responsibility, which is kuleana. And so it's very similar. Those practices are very similar from my experience and from who I've learned from to ho'oponopono, which would be this idea of taking responsibility for your community, which would be kuleana, and then also taking responsibility for problems in your life, that whatever is coming into your life that you consider a problem is because of you. That Ho'oponopono turned from more of a community where you would look at, if you would come together as a community. If there was a problem, you would work it out. If there was somebody that was having crazy behavior, you would come together to heal them and to work it out and to talk about it. And then it became more modernized, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years, where it was all of your process. I love you. Thank you. Please forgive me. We've heard this before a lot. Thank you. So you have the gratitude aspect, you have the forgiveness aspect, and also you're looking at yourself as you're doing it. And that to me is very interesting, but I'm more interested in community communication and healing in that way, because I still believe that it's all us, but I'm more interested in connection. I think more so these days than I have been in previous days as far as healing.
I think that's fascinating because I also agree very much that we have to, as a society, get out of the victim mentality. And we
Mm.
have to understand that we do have a lot more control over things that happen to us, happen for us through our thoughts. So I think that's really an amazing point. And will you explain a little bit about the healing process that because you're still working with people to heal, correct?
Not so much. Like, I
Okay.
think it's more just within the last year. It's more, you could say, mentorship, where or acting like a guide and allowing people to take responsibility and see their own process, and then just standing back and acting as a guide and helping. I think that I made that transition because it was, in a way, I was becoming like the fixer and I didn't want to take on that role. And I did have people come to me, and I respect everybody that has come to me. I have deep respect. But it was, and this is probably my perception as well, as how I was being perceived was somebody that could actually help and fix them. And I didn't want to take that role on anymore. I wanted to be able to guide people in a way where they discovered their own light, they discovered their own way to heal themselves. And so that's more of what I'm doing now, but not my total passion. It's, I do have that as a passion. I am passionate about helping individuals, but I do have another passion that I'm working on as well.
Oh, why don't you share it? What is your new passion? We have to hear about this.
Yes, I'm working with a business partner now, a dear friend of mine, to create communities based on deeper connection and learning how to build communication and connection through play and through games. And so I'm bringing a history of many years of theater and improv, and she is bringing in a lot of knowledge and background and experience through having created her own workshops where people can connect and learn each other and deepen their connection. So for me, it's exciting because it's like blending two worlds, but it's also very much the same thing. And so those are projects in the works right now, and they're not quite launched yet. I'm not gonna. I can't say any more than that. Not that I'm hiding anything, but it's in the works is basically what it is.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I think people have to check that out. So I do have a
Mm.
couple more questions I want to ask you. You had this deeper depression and you had been
Mm.
asking God to take you. You didn't want to be here anymore. And then you have the near death experience, and your higher self gives you the choice. And you said, I'm coming back. How are you different in your thoughts and how you view all of that from before to now after your near death experience?
How I view what specifically?
Specifically, those thoughts that you had that you didn't want to be here anymore. Because even though you didn't want to be here anymore, when push came to shove and you had to make a decision, you did not choose to stay on the other side. You did choose to come back. So can you just explain a little bit about what your feelings are now about how you had those thoughts about I want to leave, I want to leave, I want to leave, and you chose to come back and now you're here. Like, how does that
Hmm.
reconcile with you now?
Yeah, so back then, I believe it was coming from a deep-seated belief that I wasn't good enough. And it was that mind aspect or that perception that created those feelings of being depressed, of not feeling like I was a part of anything, feeling like an outsider. And then afterwards, I still had those, but I was curious more so why I was having those. So I was asking the question, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? And so as I had my healing process and started to help others, I began to discover that even though those feelings are very real, people are depressed. We all get, I mean, not, I don't know about everybody, but a lot of us can get depressed. That was even a perception that I was taking on that was keeping me from my happiness. My goal became like I really got into this idea of unconditional love, and I was for a while I was like, why aren't I experiencing this love? And I think I read a Rumi quote said, and I don't know the exact words, but it's about unraveling whatever's in the way of that love instead of going for that love. So I was trying to go for that love. And my process has been to unravel why I'm not feeling that love. And so that has been a process for me of really looking at my thoughts, almost like observing them. The same thing with my feelings. If something comes up, allowing myself to feel without blame or without saying that anything outside of me has caused me that way. Um, and so that has been to get back into that place of silence and that place of joy where I know that we all would like to be, that place of peace within ourselves.
Yes, I think we all
Yeah,
aspire to that. You also
yeah.
mentioned that before you had this experience, you had this deep-seated feeling that something was wrong with you. Now you've had all of these experiences, you've had this ability to heal, you've connected with all these different modalities, and you understand the importance and power of unconditional love and connecting with community. So, for the people watching, most of them are never going to have a near death experience. What can you share with them to help them on their journey to get to that place where you are at peace with those feelings of depression and the feelings of not being good enough?
Mm. I think it's going to be different for everybody. Their process is different. I really, and this, I know the term self-love can be overused, but figuring out what that means for yourself, because even if that's stepping back from those thoughts and then just observing them or those feelings, even if you can do that for 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and then maybe even longer, as a part of you that you can have compassion for, like a child. And this is, I'm not saying that I'm some master because this is ongoing for me. I'm working, anybody that says that they're already spiritually there is like, what?
Gone, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if your goal is joy, if your goal is to feel free, if your goal is love, then that's, you have that goal every day. It's about looking at why you don't have that goal. For me, that's what I look at. And I'm willing to go and to look at whatever's there to do it. And I know not everybody, some people say, oh, they have obligations, they don't have time, they have a busy life. You can take 10 minutes a day to figure out what's going on, even before you get out of bed. There's always time to make for yourself. The process of that, I don't know. That's what I do. I'm willing to go deep and to feel. I'm willing to have the hard conversations, even though my voice shakes with people. And I think that now, like where I'm going, it's not so much me. I'm more interested in finding and discovering God through other people and discovering that's where the stuff comes up too. Connecting with other people, communicating, and then have feeling safe with people in a way where people can start to play and be themselves. So, yeah, I think spirituality for so long has been about this internal path, going into the mountains, going on retreats. And that's, I'm not, that's all perfect. But there's another dimension now, I think, that we're moving into, and that is our connection with nature and also our connection with, because we are nature, our bodies are nature, also connecting with other people to the point where we can discover oneness, where we can discover that communicate and be able to go deeper with a part of us, that somebody else is a part of us.
Tyler, that's absolutely beautiful. And that is really the best example I've heard of somebody living in that spiritual concept of oneness. We are one. It's beautiful. So if
Mm.
people want to connect with you, they want to stay in touch with you as you're birthing your new passion and project into the world, how can they do that?
Yeah, YouTube is a good because I have my links there, which is my YouTube channel.
And what's your
Um,
YouTube channel
it's,
called?
it's called Powered by Source, but the little, what is it? The little
The
A is
at?
at Radical. Yeah, at Radical Heartworks. I can tell you
I'll
what
put
that
it in the
is,
show
but
notes for everybody
okay,
so they can
okay.
find it. No problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So the website is mysticsplayground.com. So people can get all, and then again, that's the project that's in progress right now. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And so,
wonderful.
yeah.
Tyler, I so appreciate you. I know it's really difficult to step out of our comfort zone to share these stories with people. And I think they are important, not just because people get to hear about your experience, but because you learn so much going through a process like this. And then you're able to articulate and share the lessons that you've learned. And you gave people some great tips today that they can incorporate into their own lives to feel more connected, and it heals people. So I'm so grateful for time with you, and I feel so lucky to be able to have a conversation like this. These feed my soul too.
Oh, yeah. This has been great. Thank you so much for connecting and asking awesome questions. And yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
It was really fun. It was really fun. Everybody watching, I hope you guys had as much fun watching this as we did. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.